said to me, sorry, everybody at the beginning of this year, everybody said to me, oh, this is going to be the year of implementation. This is going to be when we see it really play out in businesses. Everybody's going to be using it. And that's not something I've actually seen. I certainly see individuals and consumers, and especially younger people, using this technology and really getting to grips with how it works, what its flaws are, and how you can tweak it to work for you and maybe not be detected if you want to go down that route, which I don't advise. And businesses, however, are still being cautious, and there's lots of different reasons for that. We can get into that, but I think the landscape is so fastly developing, and the regulatory landscape is not fastly developing and is still very unclear. So at least in workplaces and businesses, I think there's a slower approach and there's less take up and less spoken about adoption, even though there might be individuals who are using AI.
Well, let me ask some of the, I mean, it sounds like you were about to answer some of the questions I'm about to ask, but let me go ahead and ask them. So I can think of a few reasons for the slow adoption. One might be that the technology has been overhyped. You know, they promise us the moon, it can do all this amazing stuff, and it certainly is helpful. I'm sure everyone in the room has used, you know, one of the chatbots at least once, probably frequently, but there's a difference between the technology being useful and just being like world-changing, revolutionary. So I would say one possibility is it's been overhyped. You know, it's good, but it's maybe not so world-changing. Another possibility is that there's just a lot of inertia, that maybe it is useful, and if you're a small, agile startup, you can really hop in it. But if you're a large company that's maybe not especially technology-oriented, you might just be very comfortable doing things the way they've always been doing and afraid to suddenly completely change your operations to something new that's untested. So one is maybe it's just there's inertia. So we have hype as a possibility, inertia is a possibility. I had a third one, but it's escaping me at the moment. It'll come to me. But why don't I hand it back to you? So what do you think are some of the reasons?
Let's address those, and then maybe we can get into kind of some of the moral implications, or even like the energy and that side of things, or cost. But I think on the hype, like, it's interesting because we are calling it a hype cycle, but to me, like, for there to be hype, there has to also be the fall, and I don't think we've seen the fall yet. We're very much like, I think this is a moment, and it could fall off a cliff, but I'm just not seeing that at the moment. And I think
to like a year ago when there was a letter circulated that said we have to pause AI development for 6 months. This is a priority. You know, AI might wipe out all of humanity. I feel like looking back now from a year ago, the hype maybe has died down a little bit, right? Or you
I
disagree?
disagree. I think now we have these models which are showing very early signs of being able to reason and think and plan and take autonomous actions for us. That's what these companies are building. That imperative is even more. When I speak to people in fields of safety who have really seen under the bonnet of some of these newer models, they are saying this, like, the regulation and the conversations about guardrails need to happen now. And even if they do happen now, these people aren't confident that they can solve it, that they can stop it. So there is a group, and I want to, like, be very clear that there are also people who don't think it's that risky at all, and this is a bubble. But there is a group who are very worried about the catastrophic risk, and because we got to this stage so quickly and kind of without really realizing it, that getting to the next jump of having these machines which have basically the same level of intelligence as most people isn't that far. And then after that, getting to machines that are even more intelligent than us could just happen very quickly. And so it seems far-flung, and yes, it's been a year and we've not had that scenario, but I'm cautious that that could happen for sure.
What about ChatGPT 5 itself? We've been kind of waiting. There's been versions, as you said. So how come we haven't seen it yet? Any
I
thoughts?
don't, yeah, we haven't seen it yet, and it doesn't sound like we're going to see it anytime soon, but we are seeing, they're calling it Shiptober, well, last month, Shiptober, where lots of these AI companies are launching different things incrementally, and I think that's building into the hype. They're trying to get as much hype as possible. I think there will be a breaking point when these systems can do these autonomous things for us and can have more of a thinking process or a human-like thinking process. We haven't reached it yet. So yes, I think it will take a while. I think in the meantime as well, to your point, what the technology can do for us right now is still relatively limited. And you've seen it's very good in writing, understanding language, very good at coding. But actually, when you think about how transformative it's going to be across different types of jobs and different sectors, I would say at the moment it seems to be impacting writing tasks, admin tasks, and some coding, which isn't this complete revolution yet.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think I totally agree. So let's circle back a little bit to the more student perspective. So, you're a journalist, I'm a teacher. We're busy kind of figuring out how our jobs are impacted, right? Like I have to deal with students that are using the technology to write essays. Now these things can solve basically any math problem that I assign. So I'm kind of feel like I'm on a treadmill keeping up. You're probably dealing with the fact that editors might be leaning towards, slimming down staffs and trying to automate more journalistic activities, which is a whole scary can of worms. So we're both confronting these things within our own lives, but we already are in our professions. Imagine someone who is going through college and is heading towards graduation, whether they're in their first year or last year. What thoughts? I mean, I don't even want to say advice necessarily, but like, what are some of our thoughts around how they can prepare for this rapidly changing world? How they can kind of get a leg up on the competition as far as labor market?
Yeah, well, I would love to hear from your perspective after about how you're approaching it and what your view is for, I guess, people who are students who are living through it right now. But I think certainly this is something to stay ahead of, and I think as younger generations have always shown with digital technology is you can be ahead of it. You're naturally ahead of it anyway because you're living and breathing this stuff. So use that to your advantage, really become aware of how to use these tools, what their flaws are, how you can mitigate some of these risks that we know, like hallucinations or them able to spit out inaccurate things, and really make yourself a specialist in this area, and you will be invaluable because you'll be coming into workplaces that are grappling with this, and a lot of higher ups may not be of that generation and they may not fully understand it or embrace it, or even if they do want to embrace it, they will be looking to younger staff to really lead use cases and show like what the potential is. So I think that's really your power. And I've seen a lot of companies setting up these AI workforces to work out how each company should be using AI, and they almost always have younger people on them from all over the business. And I think that sort of all level view is really important, and that's where students who are going into work can capitalize. But you have to be kind of loud about it as well. As what I would recommend is really show off that you know how this stuff works, and show a keenness and an eagerness to the technology while also an awareness of the risk. But tell me what you've been seeing. I'm very interested.
I think that touches on some really interesting points, which is that you don't have to just be like a focused technical expert in AI to be one of these people that you're describing that's very aware of it, on top of it, helping the organization adapt to it. I was teaching data science when you had to basically be a computer scientist or a statistician to do data, or sometimes both. So it's a very narrow profession, and it was valuable. But again, it's like very much a numbers game. If you have all this quantitative background, you can do data science. And I think AI is very different because it's not like you have to be a computer scientist to contribute to AI, right? You could be a person in your business, organization, whatever it is, that's just played with it more and is more aware of the different versions. Like, what's the difference between Google's and OpenAI's and all these other, and Anthropic's model? What's the difference between, like Cristina mentioned, this reasoning one, this O1? What does it do? How to use it? There's so much where you don't have to know any coding, any computer science whatsoever. You just get like on the ground experience playing with these things. So it's very different than what I'm used to teaching, where I wouldn't say like, just, play with statistics and eventually you'll figure out and be good at data science. Like, no, you had to actually train in it. But with AI, even the people who design and invent and build this stuff, they don't really know how it works, right, in practice, because it's like, creating a new entity. So it's almost like we're moving from the more math and stats and computer world that I'm more used to, almost more into biology, where the only way to learn how these things operate is to do experiments, to get your hands dirty, poke and prod, measure things and try things out. And I think that's great for students and for everyone, because I think it broadens out who can be part of the conversation. So you mentioned some of the scary things like environmental usage. So even if you don't have any computer science background, if you're studying sustainability or any environmental science, you have a voice that matters in the conversation around AI. If you're studying business management, business organization, any of these things, I just feel like it's so broad. Like, I do feel like AI might be a tiny bit on the overhyped end. That's my personal judgment. But I also think it's not going away, even compared to things like crypto. I think crypto has certain uses, but they're way narrower than what they were built for originally. I think AI does have a lot of hype, but I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to continue growing. Maybe it'll be a little slower and more steady than this, rocket ship we've been riding recently, but it's not going away. It is going to change things in time. But I think it's great that there's just room for so many discussions. Like Bentley just created this AI major, and it's joint between computer science and philosophy. And part of the idea is we need people to think about the ethics, to think about the psychology. I just recently saw a study or a survey of some kind that found out of all the different use cases of, I think it was generative AI, I forget if it was chatbots specifically, I think it was generative AI across the board. Lots of people are trying lots of different things, but the use case that far and away has the most returning users, like people keep coming back to it and using it week after week, is I don't know what the technical word was, like basically using them for companionship. It's like people chatting with a chatbot. So coders might professionally use generative AI to help them write code. A lot of people are experimenting using it to write essays or this or that. It's a lot of experimentation. People try things, see what works, what doesn't. But this kind of AI companionship seems to have people coming back over and over and over. And there's all kinds of amazing questions. Is this going to help reduce loneliness in society because people can talk to these things? Is it going to increase it because then instead of depending on real life humans, you'll be depending on these machines? So this is just one example where psychology, sociology, philosophy comes into the equation. So it's just an amazing topic where everything, like no matter what you're majoring in, no matter what you're studying, you have some insight that will help society, your organization, your family, whatever it is, grapple with this rapidly changing setting that we're in.
100%. I agree with all of that. Although Bitcoin today seems to be doing very well, so crypto might be on the comeback. But I think
money for sure.
But in terms of just like the broadness of it, I think what's really exciting, and I'm so glad you mentioned philosophy as well, it is the different areas that you can now bring to this technology. And for me, it's like nothing is set yet. And that's both like terrifying, but also quite exciting that you as students, as like you're going to come up in the world and be working as in a position of real influence here. And so you can shape this technology because it's not being shaped yet. And by the time we get any sort of regulation or real progress on the capabilities, that's going to be when you're in the workforce. So I think really think about it widely and think about what you want this technology to do for you, and wherever your interest or specialism is, how that pertains to this, and how if it's energy, how you can influence that. So yeah, I think it's really exciting. And perhaps, I think that there's been some talk of the catastrophic risks of AI and that we need to put a pause. It's a risk to humanity. Don't discount that, but also there are some really near-term risks that we've already seen playing out and are starting to experience. And AI has huge problems with bias still. It has huge problems with accuracy. We've obviously just had an election last night here in San Francisco, and in America generally. But we've seen the deep fakes that have circulated, and I'm sure there will be much talk about how that's impacted results. So I think seeing some of those near-term risks as well and what potential solutions are for them is also a really good way to think about the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you had mentioned social media as an interesting comparison point. I think that it's very helpful as far as adoption and what you were saying about how the students now are at a position where you can enter these organizations and help them kind of modernize and absorb and utilize AI. Thinking back to social media, early on, it was kind of like there was young people that were influencers, and then all the establishment didn't really touch it. And it took an amazingly long time to realize it doesn't have to be a kind of us versus them. Like journalists realize they can actually have TikTok accounts and they can describe what it's like to be a reporter, what it's like to travel and to go into war zones. They can connect with their audience and build up an audience and a readership that will help spread their journalism and their writing. So at first, meaning for many years, it really was like established newspapers, that's the old traditional way, and then young social media influencers. And it was very separate. And we realized, why not have the best of both? We can still do traditional news and reporting, but we can also connect with our audience better than we might have been before. So I see, you're much closer to this field. I shouldn't be explaining how journalism has developed to you. I'm sure you know it better than me. But I just want to say, I think there's a lot of lessons there when we look back to social media to thinking about AI, that we might be entering a setting where, as Cristina was saying, there has been slower adoption in the kind of the economy than we might have expected. And I think it might look a little bit like the social media situation, where it might be sort of an us versus them of, okay, a bunch of people are going to get laid off because their jobs will be automated by AI. And then some organizations might step back and say, we're not going to use AI at all because we're morally opposed to it. And I think it's going to be kind of confrontational for a bit. It'll take a while to find that middle ground where we're using it sustainably, people are keeping their jobs, it's augmenting their work rather than replacing it. So I think a lot of the generation that you'll be entering the workforce will be figuring out that balance of we're not going to fully throw our entire economy to the wolves of AI, but we're also not going to shun it completely. We're going to find that middle ground. And again, I think social media has been helpful. Not everyone is a social media influencer, but it is harder to find people that are completely removed from social media. Like every business needs to have some social media account or front because that's how they interact with people. So I see AI a bit in that direction. I'm curious if you want to elaborate or.
Yeah, and I think whether it's hype or not, there's definitely a bit of over egging of AI right now, where we've had AI for years and years and years, and we've been using AI generally in our workforces for such a long time, and it's already led to job losses in previous iterations, not this generative chatbot type. But if you're looking at how it's impact farming or construction, we've got loads of automation on social media that's hugely driven by AI. The whole filter revolution, which maybe was before your time, but that was AI generated imagery. So we've already had a lot of this technology, and I think there is a propensity for people to be like, oh, this generative AI is going to ruin jobs and it's going to completely change the way that we work. But we've already worked with AI before. And so, yes, it might automate some roles. That's happened before. It's just not necessarily happened in white collar jobs or some of the professions that people with the loudest voices have. So I would also just be thinking, if when you're looking into a job, if you're thinking of applying for anything, just look really closely at the job description, or better, in the job interview, ask about this. Like, where do you see this role going? What are the sort of tasks that you see being augmented or replaced by AI? And then really think, what can you as an individual employee going into this organization, what can you do differently? What type of skills can you do over a computer? And I would say, from personal experience, this technology is very good at writing. It could probably write a news story quite easily, although we don't use it to write stories at the FT. What I can do is chat to people and go out and interview people and really dig deep and do investigations. That's the part of the job I love. And I'm hoping that AI will actually give me more time to be able to do that. So really just think what in this job that you want to do can a computer not do right now? And then focus on building those skills.
Yeah, I completely agree. I find myself doing that as a teacher, and in a way, students have not been reading textbooks for many, many years. So I think it's great that they might be more inclined to interact with the chatbot and learn the information that way. So I don't feel like I have any unique value by being a source of knowledge. The internet has it all. Chatbots are now going to have it all. Like it's all out there. That's not my role. But mentorship is something that I think is very special and human and distinguishing. So I find in a way I'm less playing a role of being the source of knowledge that like when you think of a professor like 200 years ago, right? That's the sage on the stage, they call it. And more thinking like, how can I help inspire students and get to know them and like really develop that human connection? Because that's what AI cannot do. And I think for many, many years will not be able to do, if ever. So I think I totally agree with Christine. It's really interesting and helpful. And I even find it kind of fun to think, to put it in like kind of business language, what's my value add? Like, what do I contribute, especially as you said, relative to a computer? And one thing I think that helps too is to remember it's all dynamic, is how I'd kind of say it in math as opposed to static. Everything depends on everything else. So it's not just like me versus the machines. What do I do? What do they do? Because what I'm capable of is entirely dependent on what machines can do. I guarantee if you put me back in like caveman times that I was out in the world, I would not survive a day. Like I'd be terrible. But I'm able to survive in society today because I know how to use technology, right? Computers and phones and drive a car. So what humans are capable of is not some like innate thing of just I can walk around with my brain and I'm smarter than monkeys or whatever. Humans are so productive and capable because of the world we've built around our society and our technology. So that was a little bit vague and abstract, but what I really mean here with AI is what I can do as an individual at a company and everything is a function of the technology that's available. So yes, AI will have increasing capabilities and maybe even approaching human things. If I'm someone who learns how to leverage that and use that, I'll be able to stay on top rather than thinking of it as attacking what I do and kind of taking ground from me and I'm therefore losing my value. What if I think of it as I've gotten more productive and efficient and valuable economically because of computers, because of the internet, because of all this technology. I want to see AI as fitting into that. I want to learn how to keep using it and leveraging it and stay on top. It's not like, and look, I'm a mathematician. I'll tell you, computers can do math way the hell better than me, right? That's just a fact. I have not lost my job because computers exist. What I've done is learn how to use computers in my job. And I think that's true of basically every profession and every technology. You can't view it adversarially as you versus the technology. You have to think of it as the technology is empowering humans to do what we do. And it does take thought, as Christine is saying, and reflection. What is the most practical, useful, efficient way of leveraging the technology? What would be inefficient is to become redundant and just end up doing what the machine can do without you. That would be, a poor choice, especially as you're planning for the future. But if you can think, what are the things I can continue doing and that the machines can help expedite and make me even better at, then you'll be well positioned. So easier said than done, I'm sure. That was very abstract, but I think it's still, sometimes it really helps. I don't know why, but I always love thinking of really zooming out. And I've ended up talking to quite a few journalists and things and getting quoted in articles. And I just find I'm not like super up on the technology of AI. Like there are plenty of people at OpenAI or even computer science departments that know way more about neural networks and deep learning and all this stuff than me. What I've found has been really helpful is just to really step back and zoom out and try to see the forest for the trees. Because AI is moving so quickly and developing so rapidly, and it's very easy to get kind of caught up in that rat race of like, oh, this company produced this latest version that does this and it beat this benchmark. And you can get so fixated on the details and kind of forget to zoom out and see the big picture. So I strongly encourage my students, and I find myself doing this, really take some time sometimes to pause and reflect on the big picture. But you can't only do that. You do have to play with these systems and see what they can do. But don't just fixate on the details and the latest version and all the companies jockeying, because you'll get lost in the details there, which are quite overwhelming at the moment.
Noah, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I coming through okay? Because okay,
Perfect.
my system was acting weird, so I had to turn off my camera. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca, and I'm one of your contacts at the Financial Times. I work with higher education, and I just thought I would contribute a little bit about how we're using it. I don't think any of this is a secret.
It won't be.
The FT did make, yeah, stop the recording. The FT has a relationship with OpenAI, and we use it internally. And I can say this because there was, I think, a press release about it. And initially, I was very wary of it. As I've mentioned, my husband works in the industry, so he has his own opinion about where the intelligence is, and he actually has a background in philosophy, so he gets to talk this all through, and I have to follow what he's talking about. But so yeah, I was sort of unsure about how to use it, and there was a little bit of ambivalence because of the copyright issues and the fact that I'm in the publishing industry. But it came from the top, and so in our case, and you will find in life, when your boss tells you to do something, you do it. And so, giving up and pushing it aside was not an option. Not that I was doing it intentionally. I was just like, I don't know what this is. I've never used it before. So a couple cases that have come up recently that have been really helpful. One is they want us to use it. So my team, we're customer success managers. So we work with clients, encouraging them to use the Financial Times, but it's a very common job nowadays. A lot of software as a service companies have this function. So we're not real marketing people, but we do have to write a lot of emails. And the business was quite concerned about our emails and making sure that we're in line with the tone of the business. And so they actually created, through ChatGPT, a way for us to input our emails, and then out pops a version that is more in line with the voice of the Financial Times. And it's been quite helpful, honestly. There have been times when I sat on writing an email for the longest time. I finally just threw it into ChatGPT, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to tweak it, but that was a great start. And then actually recently we had someone else, the manager of my team, create a chat GPT, and I may not be using the right language, to help us with some technical troubleshooting that we needed to do. Like, we have some limitations on our support team, and our team doesn't have the expertise, and someone was able to feed in all these like emails and information. And then so we can go in and we can ask it questions. So again, it's not replacing anyone in either of these cases. It's just helping us do a better job. And I could definitely see maybe someone who's been in the workplace a little longer, hasn't worked with these as much. I feel like it's a real strategic advantage that a student who has this information, knows how to use it, is comfortable with it, can walk in and be supportive of the team and have ideas about how to use it. I think that would be a real advantage, and you get to develop a relationship with people. You get maybe exposure to people you wouldn't be able to speak with so easily otherwise. So this is just myself coming from, my position, but it's really opened my eyes to the possibilities. And again, not looking at it as competition for your job, but figuring out how to use it. I feel a little bit like it's a transitional time. Like, I don't feel like it's replacing jobs yet. I think it's too early. So I think at the moment, just learning how to work with it, I think would be very advantageous. Thank you for letting me chime in during the talk.
And yes, it's easy to get caught up in very abstract discussions, but it's really helpful to hear very, case studies, grounded examples. What is it actually like at people's companies? How is it being used? How is it not being used? Well, since we're about half an hour in, I think it's a good time to give the students a chance. So let me first see, are there any questions? But I'm a professor, so I'm allowed to do this. If no one asks, I'm going to start calling on the audience, and I can do that even here. Yeah.
Do you find that in your classes or through your research that you feel like students have become too dependent on AI? And if so, do you see that having a negative impact on our futures?
That's a great question. That would take.
Do you mind repeating that? Sorry, yeah. Do you mind repeating that for those of us virtual?
We have mics in the room, but let me make sure they're on. Yeah, it looks like the room mics are on, but I guess it wasn't enough. So basically, I'll paraphrase, but as a teacher, am I finding students becoming too dependent on AI? So for instance, like maybe, okay, I'll elaborate on it. But yeah, becoming too dependent on AI. And if so, do we foresee some long-term potential harm from that? So to make that, I think, wonderful question, to make it a little concrete, so I teach math, I teach data science. My wife is a music historian. She teaches music and history. So she does a lot of essays. And I do think their essays are just so oriented towards what chatbots can produce that I think there very much is a worry that students will not develop the ability to write. So I'll say this, as a math teacher, we do assign math problems because we have to grade them, and there's all this bullshit around that. But at the end of the day, I think it's helpful because if I'm assigning things that a computer could do, it may not be the most useful thing for a student to do. So I think in a way I'll kind of flip it around, like it's not just that students might become too dependent, maybe teachers and professors have become too dependent on not recognizing technological change. So if I'm still teaching the way I've been teaching for 20 years and still acting like being able to solve a calculus problem is the most important thing, and yet computers can easily solve any calculus problem, I would say I'm the one who's become too out of touch, not the student. So for me, I find it's helpful. It's making me think, what can computers do in math? What can't they? What do I find valuable? So for instance, and this goes back to what Cristina and I were discussing, storytelling is a huge part of data science, and it never really had the emphasis that it deserved in education. It was more like we would teach students statistics and programming and all this stuff, then they'd get a job, and suddenly they had to give a presentation to a boardroom where no one has ever taken statistics. And they were never trained how to communicate that, how to tell a story with data. So they kind of pick it up on the job. Well, now we're starting to go back, like I have a lot of discussions on our department, and say, look, if the AI can do a lot of the technical stuff, or if it's making it easier for people who didn't have coding skills to have coding skills to enter into data science, other things, the parts that get automated, fine, but what doesn't is storytelling. And that's really like, what do you learn from the data? How does it impact your organization? What are the actionable insights? All these things around that. So for me, I'm finding it is helpful to break a complacency as a teacher to really think what's actually most important for us to teach. Let's not teach the things that we've just because we've been teaching the same way for 20 years. Let's really think in the world now, what is valuable to teach? So for me, I haven't had as much of a problem within data and math. But for my wife who teaches and does a lot of writing, there we are seeing, and it's not just like she'll tell me about it at dinner, but we've just read and heard a lot about it. There, I think the dependence issue is much greater and scarier because writing is really a process of figuring out your own thoughts. And like I do a lot of writing as well. And it's just, I never understand something until I try to write. The writing is it's not just about producing a document, the deliverable. Writing is a whole process where you create thoughts and you come to terms with them and you grapple with them and you're really seeing how they develop. So I worry that there is a great tendency to shortcut that and just think of writing. The goal of writing is to produce a document, and look, ChatGPT can produce documents. Therefore, anytime I assigned an essay, I can just create an essay using ChatGPT. And yeah, okay, the student's going to edit and change it, but that's different than really grappling with the thoughts. So I think for writing, there is a tremendous risk of that, where it's just so easy to produce essays that are good enough to get an A, that why would a student spend all that time and not do that? But then you'll be losing that experience of grappling with ideas, which I think is far more valuable than anything you'll ever write itself. So in other words, for me, writing helps me think. Thinking will always be valuable no matter what the world is like. So we may have to think harder, how can we really make sure students are having that thinking experience, even if it becomes too easy for them to just produce essays. So it depends on the discipline, it depends on what our long-term goals are, but definitely it's something we have to be aware of. As far as long-term impact, like we can kind of guess, and I do feel like writing is a dangerous one, that writing is so valuable for thinking that if we do short circuit that, I think that's problematic. But it's very, to be a little scientific, what you asked is a fantastic question that we cannot answer for so many reasons, because it's very difficult to do educational studies. To properly do it, we'd have to do a controlled study, have some students go through college using AI, some go through it not using it, see the difference, how are you going to measure the difference with, standardized tests? What are you really measuring? Okay, we could wait 20 years and see which ones are happier or maybe more economically successful. You can't do that, right? That's impossible. And then factor in how quickly things are changing. Even if I try to study like how does a specific version of ChatGPT impact the student, by next year there's going to be a new version. So everything is moving so quickly that it's very hard to get real research answers to the kinds of questions. So all we have is intuition. And my intuition is just the thinking and the thought process is the most prized one that I think we just need to make sure to not short circuit. But any like production of a deliverable, like if AI helps you produce a presentation, fine. If it helps you produce an essay, fine. I'm not worried about, or for my students, if it helps them do calculus problems, fine. It means they shouldn't be spending their life solving calculus problems. That wasn't the important thing. It's always about finding, like what Cristina was saying earlier, what are the valuable things that we want humans to be able to do? But we just have to step back and say, you may not be able to target those directly. You may have to work up to that. And that's where you have to be really careful. So are we cutting out skills that on their own don't seem that important, but build towards something that is more important? And again, thinking of writing, we may be entering a world where it's not so important to be able to write. I hope we're not, because I love writing, and I'm sure Christina's the same. I think writing's beautiful, and I hope it doesn't go away, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we are entering a world where like the skill of writing won't be so valued because computers will do it so much cheaper that why would you pay a human to do it? But I do think writing is so tied to thinking, and I don't think we'll ever be in a world where thinking is no longer economically or socially valuable. So we just have to be really careful. Are we, when you talk about the dependencies, are we, it's very much what you said. Think about the long term. Some things, well, okay, I'm kind of rambling here, but another good thing to think about is sports. Any sport you do drills and practices that on their own are not helpful, but they build the skills you need to succeed in the sport. So I think that's a lot of what happens in education. Again, to my experience teaching math, I don't think calculus problems are important at all. But I do think they help kind of strengthen our brain and our way of thinking, just like assigning essays helps strengthen our brains. And in my wife's classes, she has students listen to music and really think about that. I think all these things are important drills. They may not be super valuable on their own, but they contribute to your overall, what you're trying to achieve in life. So I do like to think of sports like, I could practice running back and forth on a track or throwing a ball or whatever. None of that matters, right? That's totally pointless. But you need all those components to come together to be a professional athlete. Okay, so I don't know.
If I could just briefly add, like I think there's definitely a moment that's like we don't really know where we're at in education in terms of measuring this or how to teach it, etc. But as an individual, as a student, if you feel like you're becoming too dependent on AI, like one thing you can do as a human is like reflect on that and work out, okay, well, if I am becoming too dependent on this, if I am just using it automatically with no critical thinking, without really like considering the output or even comparing how different models output your prompt, like reflect on that, try and maybe adapt how you're using it, or maybe try and do something without it. I think we don't know how this is going to shake out in education, but you are responsible for how you learn and you develop. And if you do get that slightly gut feeling or maybe guilty feeling that like you're letting the AI take too much of the load, then I would reflect on that and try and change that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminded me of another point, which is a broader view of education. So when I was in your shoes in college, I thought taking courses in every year of college and whatever education you're in is kind of about downloading knowledge. Like I take this course and now I've downloaded that little piece of knowledge and I have it. So I thought, okay, college is 4 years of downloading knowledge into my brain. I'll have it. And then, that's it. And looking back, what I learned in college, like the factual knowledge, I've completely forgotten or never used. Like it wasn't about the knowledge that I attained in college. What I realized is education, college and otherwise, it's about learning how to learn. So what I learned in college is how to absorb information. It wasn't the information I was given then, it's learning how to think, how to absorb knowledge. And that's carried with me for my whole life and been super valuable. So absolutely, college was great. It changed the way my brain worked. but it's not because I had 4 years of information that I still use constantly. It's because I had 4 years of learning how to absorb information. And I think that's very relevant now, and it ties to what Cristina was saying. If you're in a class and or whatever the experience is, and you're finding like, oh, it's really easy to produce these essays or whatever, the assignment using AI, and I can pass and get an A, just remember, the point in the class is not just to absorb the knowledge of the class, it's to get something deeper and more longer lasting. So maybe we are, because it's a very disruptive moment, as Christina's saying, education is, things are changing quickly. It does not hurt to be proactive and try to make your personal education as valuable as it can be. You don't have to just aim for, hey, I can use these tools and I can get A's, and that's the goal of college. Think of, I have 4 years where I don't have to focus on, have a boss and focus on all the deadlines and things that I have once I have a job. This is my chance to really learn how I can become an individual, how I can think, how I can learn, how I can write. I can build all these skills that'll be valuable for life. If you don't find your teachers giving it to you, if you don't find your classes giving to you, if it's so easy to just use AI and skip a lot of the steps, I hate to say this out loud, but maybe that's fine. Go ahead and do that, and then spend the rest of your time doing something else that you find is valuable. So you can be an active driver in your education. I think professors don't always know what's the right thing, especially as technology is moving fast. So if you feel like you can do something that's valuable, go ahead and do it. Don't just leave it up to us.
No, I want to bring a question from online. What resources, and this is for obviously knowing Cristina, what resources would you recommend for someone who doesn't know anything about AI to learn more at a beginner level? Any online courses, videos, podcasts, etc.?
Cristina probably has better answers for that. So let me start with you.
I have some. Obviously, the FT is a great resource. We have some really good explainers. I've written some of them, and I'm not saying they're good because I've written them. They're good because they helped me understand these things. So we have one where it really distills what some of these terms are, like LLMs, ML. I think you can get caught up in the lingo sometimes, but having an article which really lays out what these things are and how they work is important. So try and read ideally the FT, but news articles that do explain these things. For me, another really useful resource, which actually was written before ChatGPT and all of the generative hype, is Genius Makers, which is a book by a journalist called Cade Metz. And it's really about how we got to this point where this way of developing AI was created and how it went from academia and universities into these really powerful tech companies. And so for me, it really introduced me to the technology, how it was built, and then how companies took it over and who the people at those companies were. From the beginning, you had Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg. This is years ago already working on this stuff. So that was a really good primer and just a really well-written book that's very easy to read. I think I read it in 3 days. And then I would recommend going on to AI researchers, Substacks, try and find a broad brush, because people have very different views on the topic, and they might be doomer and think it's all going to end the world, or they might be quite optimistic. And a resource that I really like is from the Center for AI Safety. They've just created an online textbook that you can download and breaks down, again, lots of these terms, lots of the arguments around safety as well, but in quite an accessible way. So I recommend going to those resources, and yeah, happy to follow up with some more. But I think really just reading quite widely and working out that what different people's views are as well when you're reading it. Try and be quite think about it critically. Again, something that we as humans can do very well. Why are they writing it in this way, and why do they believe that this is a good or a bad thing? And then work out how you feel about it.
Yeah, but I know you do a better job than I would on that. I would just add one more, is at the end of the day, don't forget that you can learn a ton just by playing with these things, right? You can read all day to learn about them, but at the end of the day, just jump in and experiment and play, and it takes zero knowledge, right? This is not coding where you have to have a bunch of background. Zero knowledge. You can just open up any of these apps and try and just talk with it, interact with it, see what happens. So get that practical hands-on experience. Yep.
Well, I have a question regarding more of the professional and business side. What I've heard of now is that AI is more focusing on operational tasks, but how it is going to help the strategic work done in businesses?
So could you hear that, Christina?
Yes. So how's it going to impact strategic tasks? I actually think this is already happening. I've been speaking to some founders that basically when they're preparing for a board meeting, they go into a chatbot and they say, okay, I'm preparing for a board meeting. Here's some recent documents on how my business has been performing. And can you advise me on what might come up at the board meeting and how to like deal with my board members who might be asking critical questions? And then after the board meeting, they give the chatbot basically what was said, the minutes, and ask for feedback and different advice and different like ways of looking at it. And so I think with these more advanced models where they appear to show, I guess, more reasoning capabilities, again, they're quite limited, but it's becoming more strategic. You can ask it to explore different angles. And I think AI, unlike people, are able to consider outside of where like we might live in quite a small world. They might consider quite unconventional points of view, and they might be completely irrelevant. Like I definitely asked it things before and it's not been helpful at all. But I think it can increasingly be used for strategy and used to think a bit further afield and as a sounding board to work out, okay, well, what are the things I should be focusing on? And then how should I approach them? What are the different ways? One of the ways I like playing with AI quite a lot is some of those more unconventional approaches. Ask it to give you unconventional things. Often that will deliver inaccurate results. So ask it again then to say, okay, well, like which of these are true or which of these are you confident are true? And that will give you some interesting results too. But I think operationally we know what it can do. I think we're just scratching the surface of strategy.
That reminds me of an interesting discussion with, I think it was marketing professors who were saying, like the standard exercise you'd give marketing students was you show them a product, you know, like a bottle of Coke or whatever it is, or some obscure thing, and you say, okay, you have 15 minutes or half an hour, or whatever it is, brainstorm 10 different advertising campaigns for this product. And that was like the go-to exercise because it you know, gets your creative juices flowing and you think, and even if you don't care about the product, it just trains your brain to think in that way. And now ChatGPT and related products can do that. You can just ask it to produce 100 advertising campaigns and it'll come up with a bunch. But that's not the end of the road. So now the professor's just saying, before we emphasize the come up with the ideas, that's what we wanted students to do. And now they're shifting more towards having the students use the AI to come up with a whole bunch of ideas, more than 10, like 50 or 100 or something, and then have the students go through and discuss them. And that's where the human part is, say, out of these 50 advertising ideas, which ones do we think would work? Which ones wouldn't? Which ones might actually be offensive and hurt our company? So it's just kind of shifting the balance of where that thought is put in. But I could very much see this being relevant for these kind of strategic decisions, right? Which is just, yeah, in a similar way of maybe any kind of strategic role, you might use the AI to help you brainstorm, but then you might have to spend more time being critical and analyzing the things that come up with. So I can see a lot of carryover from the marketing to the strategy sector. Yeah, one more.
So looking at it from employer's perspective, for instance, a graduate from Bentley for me, I came here in 2023, I'm graduating in 2027. Obviously, ChatGPT has been very influential in my education, and it's kind of taken away a lot of the hard skills I would have had to learn at Bentley. Do you think there's going to be less value in my education from an employer's perspective than someone who graduated like 10 years previously? Like, obviously, I'm now more good with AI compared to those kids who graduated earlier, but in general, my education doesn't mean as much from like a diploma standpoint.
I mean, I'm curious what Christina says. I would say almost the opposite. If I were hiring someone who went to college and spent 2 years like really using this out of necessity versus someone who, you know, was educated before this and just maybe like, and there's someone like me who just like in my spare time, I'll play with it because I'm curious. That's different than like, you know, irons in the fire. Like you're a student who has deadlines, who has deliverables, who has essays, who has assignments. Like you're, I would say, more motivated to use it. I can be pretty comfortable and just go about my life and sprinkle a little AI here and there. I bet you've used AI a lot more than me, and I think this is true of your whole generation. So I think going through college during this transitionary period is kind of the best because you have experience using it and not using it. So I would take a very optimistic view that I think you're going to be very valuable on the market, as long as, again, you don't fall into a few mistakes. One is don't lose the basic skills like writing, thinking, critical literacy, critical thinking. Another is not to get too wed to any particular product. I think there was earlier some hype that, oh, we'll go teach prompt engineering and everyone will be a prompt engineer. And yes, I think being able to interact with these systems is useful and valuable, but I can very much imagine people like becoming the master of prompting ChatGPT 4 and then ChatGPT 5 comes out and everything they learn completely becomes worthless. So being comfortable with AI broadly speaking and generative AI broadly speaking, I think is very valuable. Getting wed to any particular product will be out of date in 1 year, so I'd avoid that trap. So I think there's some missteps you could make, but as long as you don't fall into these traps, I think your experience with it will be very, very valuable. And no one's going to look at your degree and say, oh, that was the ChatGPT generation, they didn't learn anything. I would say that's the generation that probably learned the most because they've, been in the midst of a very rapidly changing world, probably more than the next 2 years, because we may not see AI developing at the same pace as the last couple of years. I might be wrong, but you might have been at the most pivotal moment. And I think, having your life fully dedicated to learning during a pivotal moment in history is pretty cool and valuable. But I'd love to
100%. And I would love to have seen your experience. If any students just want to reach out to me and tell me what it's been like, I would be fascinated to hear. This is stuff that I'm not seeing, even though I'm at the forefront of it. And you should capitalize on that. Nobody thought that students, well, mathematicians who suddenly had a calculator were invaluable, or students who were learning when computers first became popular were invaluable. If anything, it makes you more valuable, and you really need to make the most of that and use it to your advantage. You will be going into workplaces that are unfamiliar with this, and you guys are comfortable with it, and you know how to use it, and you know how to make it work for you. So really big that up, I would say, if you're getting into a workplace, and big it up, but also be aware of the risks and be aware that the employer you might be speaking to might be quite concerned about it. So make sure you recognize that, maybe have some justifications for why you think AI should be used in a certain role, and just maybe research what their policies are around it beforehand as well, and make sure that you are ready to either have a debate with them about it or are aligned with their view on it. But no, I don't think it undervalues you at all. If anything, it makes you more valuable.
Yeah, I was just thinking a fun analogy would be, imagine you're a manager and you want to build a bridge. Would you rather hire an engineer who went through college and was trained in engineering after computers were developed and used, or hire an engineer who went to school before computers existed? I'd be a little scared to hire the engineer who's doing all the calculations by hand. I'd want the one who, was taught engineering with computers. So I think that's kind of what's happening now is we want people who are educated with this stuff, and they don't exist, right? You are the first generation that's being educated with the technology, rather than people like me who just pick it up a little bit in spare time. But I have a full-time job, I have kids. I don't have that much time to really play with these things.
I know there was one question.
Yeah,
I know Viral had his hand up. I just want to.
There was another one separate from Viral?
No, just
Or
Viral.
yeah. Viral, do you still have a comment or question?
Yeah, if it's possible. I don't want to take away time from students. But my question had to do with what Cristina had mentioned about autonomous generative AI and what potential conflicts that could have with personal autonomy, right? I mean, how much responsibility, and then this has implications for legal liability, right? How much autonomy do we want to give to a machine?
Yes, that's a very big question. I think in terms of from a legal and regulatory perspective, that's something which we don't have a route, and it's not proven yet. But these things, the companies have said, they're designing these agents that can take actions for you. Now, some of them have said, okay, well, the AI will write you a plan of what it's going to do, and then you have to approve it. but you can imagine that this is going to change quite quickly. And so I think we as individuals and we as consumers have to think, okay, how comfortable are we with offloading that autonomous element? And we already have a lot of autonomy in technology already. So there might be some jobs which I'm very happy for it to do. Or there might be certain guardrails like approving a plan that I would be happy to do. But I think what's really interesting, and we touched on briefly, is this having these machines be replacements for people in terms of companionship. And are we happy if these things are autonomously communicating with us from a relationship perspective? And what does that do to a society and to us as humans if our main port of call for advice, for comfort, for a sounding board is a machine instead of a human? And I think for me, when I think about these things becoming more autonomous and more intelligent, does that mean my first port of call is going to be this versus my partner, my friend? And we as individuals, we as a society really have to decide where our lines are there and how we're going to make sure that we get the future that we want.
I'm glad you brought back agents, because I do want to mention that, highlight to students. Yes, we're going to keep seeing like the newest version of ChatGPT, and like chatbots will get better, but we already have really good chatbots and they're going to get better. How's that really going to change your life? I'm not confident that it will. I think the biggest change that we're going to see in AI, and I'm not, alone in saying this or predicting this, is moving from a world where we really don't have much in the way of these AI agents to one where we do. So I'm really glad you, both Cristina and Viral, brought up agents. I think that's going to be the next big change. And again, I'm not coming up with this. A lot of CEOs and things are saying this. That's going to be the next big shift in AI. It's having these programs act more autonomously and proactively, rather than just sitting there waiting like a machine and I just say hello and it says hello back. That's how these chatbots are, right? It sits passively until we engage it, it responds, and that's the extent of the interaction. So having it more proactive, where I could do things like, say, buy me a plane ticket, and it clicks through web pages and it types something in. That's just like stage one. I could also say, have an AI agent where I say, every morning, check the different currencies. And if you see one that dipped and your model predicts that it's going to go up the next day, buy that currency for me. That's a much more active form of use of AI, and that's just the beginning. So we're going to have a lot, and it's going to be crazy. It's going to be a lot of opportunity, a lot of scary things. But I would just keep in mind, don't just think that AI is generating text and generating images. That's what we have now. Agents is what we're going to be heading towards. Be aware of it, be on top of it, however you can. Well, it looks like we're out of time. So let me thank Cristina very much for zooming in and sharing your wisdom with us. And I encourage students to check out FT's reporting. I personally found it really helpful, and especially the explainers, as you mentioned, it's been really cool. So you can, FT is like fully paywalled. So it's one of the ones where you can't even get like snippets of articles, but Bentley has subscriptions. So you can go log in through the library and you can read all this stuff for free.
Yes, and I know Rebecca had mentioned that she's going to highlight some FT resources that can be helpful on this topic and other topics. I'm going to send it out to all attendees, so you'll have that in your inboxes.
That's great.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca, for setting this up. This was great.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Any students, if you haven't signed in, please do so. Thank you. It's great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Glad everybody enjoyed it.